So as these fleets here are moving in, you know, you, you'll see it takes a while to get across the map, right? The map is quite large. It takes a bit of time, and we did that for a variety of reasons. One is to help with the scaling. Two is to add some time because, of course, you know, tactical versus real time. There's definitely some big differences in terms of how the player can try to take their time and stuff like that, and so we wanted the map just to be a little bigger to allow some time. But the other thing that's critical too is that we think the size of the map will allow for a variety of different play styles. So there's a few things that we've done that will really enhance the play of tactical, unlike some other 4X games that we've been playing lately, and just getting the feel for what's out there, right? So one of the things with having a bigger map is that bigger maps allow for more variety of combat styles, right? So it's not just about chasing the enemy down and, okay, here's this two-lock fleet here, and, I'm just going to go run over here and do circles, right, and fight the fleet. The idea would be is we have ships at these different scales, and each of the ship classes is going to play very differently than the other. So, for instance, we're going to allow for subsystem targeting in the game, as well as having a 10% bonus damage for attacking a ship in its aft area. So, that'll make bigger ships like this with subsystem targeting and having hard points set up, right? It will be much easier to target these type of capital ships, these larger Titan class vessels, because the hard point is simply going to be larger, and you have these smaller ships, like for instance let's use the destroyer here. And actually, let's just use the right side, right? Let's just use the AI. So let's just make our point with the AI. So we have these little frigates here that can just zoom around the rear and attack the rear of the ship. They're going to get a 10% bonus. And on top of that, they might be able to target the engines much easier, because all the hard points will be based on the real points on the ship that they would be located. So for instance, the engines are going to be in the rear. You can't fire on the engines from the front of the ship. So as you're able to kind of outflank your enemy, you could disable the engines of a Titan much easier than a Titan could disable the engines of a frigate, right? And so these are the kind of things that moving forward, we really think the map size is going to help, and the ship scaling will help contribute, because essentially a lot of games out there don't really take advantage of flanking and those sorts of things, and really a lot of games kind of become this space race of who can build the biggest and baddest ship, right? So essentially, who can build 100 Titans maxed out with weapons and armor and shielding, versus really thinking about, okay, in late game, maybe frigates still have some value, maybe destroyers still have some value, right? So they're small ships, sure, and they can be, obviously they have less hit points, so a big Titan like this can easily from a distance destroy these smaller frigates, right? And so that's it, where again the map size is going to help, because the Titan then can play that role. You can choose to kind of turtle your ships and turn these Titans into long-range ships if you want to. You can choose to use them kind of as a bludgeon or a big tank, right? And load them up with lots of armor and weaponry and just have them go in there and duke it out with the smaller ships. Of course, taking the risk that they could be damaged in the numerous subsystems. The other tactic you can use too is that notice that we have our ships here that are scaled. And also, just to give a quick reference here too, these ships are all scaled on a 1-to-1. So these are all true scaled. So from small little frigate to the destroyer, the cruiser, and the battleship, these are all scaled they're all scaled relatively true to each other. They're all 1-to-1. When you get to Titans and Behemoths, they just become too large for us to be able to scale them properly. And to maintain the true scale that's relative to the ships. This Titan would probably be 3 to 4 times the size on the map. And then in reality, it just kind of becomes the Titan show. And plus, don't forget, we also have a Behemoth class, which in many cases is twice the size of a Titan, right? So then you're dealing with an object that's potentially 6 times the size of, let's say, a battleship. Or actually, really, six times the size of a scaled-down Titan that we have in this scene here. And so, what do you do, for instance, when you have these little ships, like a little frigate? Let's just move him out here in the distance. How do you really know where that frigate's at? So we're tracking him here because we have a very controlled scene here. And let's go ahead and move him a little further out. But where's the frigate now, right? So we're just kind of watching it on the map. But again, it's very difficult to see these things. And so we want to keep things scaled. And obviously in this scene, there's still some issues with the scaling. So one of the things we're going to be doing is ships move past a certain distance, they'll become a hologram, and they'll kind of become a little larger. But that'll let the player really see things from afar on the map, and also help us kind of maintain the scaling. And so we're going to be using a lot of distance distance scaling and different little tools to really make the camera work for these ships having a variety of scales. But in regards to scaling, another thing that you can look at doing, because the ships are of different scales, and another thing that we will be implementing is having weapons colliders that when the weapons fire, it's not about if it collides with the object that you targeted, but it'll exist in space so that it actually can hit any target. So for instance, let's say that, let's just move a couple of these little ships here. So let's move our destroyer too. We're going to have a little attack group here. So let's just have these guys move over here. We're going to have them... By the way, of course, the ships will not hide inside of each other. That's just, we haven't got all the colliders working yet. But let's just say, for instance, that we want these little frigates and destroyers to go in and damage the rear of this battleship, right? We're going to have them kind of act as the scalpel of the fleet, do some additional damage. But of course, we know that from afar, bigger ships have a big advantage, right? Big weapons that can damage more critically these smaller ships versus larger ones. So one of the things that we can do is use our destroyer, or actually our Titan, as a shield. And essentially, since the objects aren't assigned, the ship weapons aren't worrying about passing through the ship to hit these ones or whatever, and the ship is firing, right? So those weapon shots aren't wasted. They'll actually hit the Titan. The Titan will take the damage, but the little ships won't. And what you can do is use the Titan as just, like I said, a big shield, so that while it's in position, we can then roll around and target the battleship. And again, disable its engines, etc. Maybe you're interested in capturing the technology off of some of these ships, or maybe your fleet's really small and you have a chance to gain some ships in combat. These are all choices up to the player, and so what we've really tried to do with Tactical is enable features that let these choices be available, right? And so we think that this will add obviously realism to Tactical, but is also going to allow for replayability, because really, a lot of times, especially if I play a 4X game, I kind of know after I've played it once or twice. I pretty much know this is my tech build order, and a lot of how I build my tech is based upon my ships, of course, because I need my ships for military, for both defense and offense. And so typically, if it's really just a matter of who can scale the biggest ships the fastest, and you're gonna really just go for bigger ships, really cool guns, and really cool shields. And then you'll just build technology to have a good industry to build lots of these Titans or whatever, right? Whatever ship unit you're building, to build it really quickly, right? And so replayability becomes difficult when essentially you're replaying the same scenario. The only difference is that the AI is making some, different choices, but here and there. But in reality, it's really responding the same to you because really you're playing the same. So we think that there is a really good link between Tactical and the larger strategic layer of a 4X game, and that if we can introduce a lot of these elements like I've been discussing into Tactical, It's going to um, change how you play the main game in terms of how does fleet composition work, right? So we're not going to have 100 Titans in an empire. That's just not going to happen in Lord of Rigel. Maybe you'll have maybe 10 to 30 of them, and maybe a couple behemoths, right? We're not going to have 30 Death Stars, Death Star like objects floating around the galaxy, right? Probably not realistic. And yet, for a lot of 4X games, that's kind of the layer that they're playing on. And then the question also becomes, as you progress through those layers, does a frigate really have a place in a lot of 4X games when you have these kind of Death Star like objects? And the answer is really no. It just kind of ends up being this really kind of advanced target practice game that you're playing. And so this is where if you focus on tactical and adding some features and depth to it, you can kind of change the strategic layer about how do we build and design fleets, right? What kinds of weapons are we choosing to research? Because now there's a lot more versatility. It's not just about building up, it's also kind of about building out and being more specialized in doing so, right? And there's a lot of different ways to win combat. I mean, sure, we can build a fair number of Titans and we can kind of bludgeon the enemy. That's one way to handle it, right? But at the same time, if the AI has a lot of small craft, again, here we have this Titan with this huge target on its back for engines. Imagine the Titan trying to target the engines on this little ship, right? And as well with placing hard points that are real to the model itself, right? So we're not just saying, oh, the whole ship is a big hard point, or I target weapon subsystems, but if I hit let's say I'm going to target the computer, whether I hit the object, let's say, here or in the front, it does the same damage to the computer. Well, that doesn't really make sense either, right? And it kind of takes away the use of the map, right? And moving around, right? Because it kind of really, at that point, what's the point of encircling the enemy, right? It kind of becomes like a very old style of military combat where essentially here, we're going to have our ships here and they're going to point and they're going to look straight at this Titan, and all that's going to happen is the Titan fires and they fire back, and the Titan fires and then they're going to fire back, right? And so this doesn't even really make use of the 2D space, and let's not even think about the 3D space, because, again, this is just a 2D map, right? And most games that are out there that are in space combat are not even utilizing the fullness of a 2D space. And 3D adds a lot of additional complexities that, maybe at a future date, that's something that we might look into. But again, we really want to make sure we got the 2D space right. And we really obviously want to get Lord of Rigel out there too. So that's some of what we're looking at here when we're talking about, kind of ship versatility. And they're in each of these classes, right, has some personality. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is changing ship speeds and banking per class, so that frigates obviously are going to bank harder and run faster than a Titan is, right? Regardless of the tech, they're going to be a faster ship. And as well, I'm sure you've noticed too that we've got engine glows on these ships, which of course are maxed out. We're going to add some fine-tuning details, like, when the ship is, idle, it's going to be off, and then it'll scale itself up and down depending on how fast it's going for the engines. So all these engines right now are at, kind of full bore. And as well, adding things like hard points to these ships, so that even adding more customization. So each of these ships as well is going to have hard points. So one of the great things, and we got really fortunate, it wasn't part of the original design, but as we really thought about how to rework tactical, how to make this right, how can we do better, we started looking at the models and we're like, gosh, there's all these hard points. And we really, our 3D artist really thought about, if these ships were real, what would they actually act like? What's really practical? So, as you can see, let's look at this Titan here. There's all sorts of little firing ports lined up on the ship. There's all sorts of escape pods. There are missiles. There are fighter launch bays, right? So all these things exist on the ship. and it seemed kind of like a shame to not utilize all these things. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is that we're going to allow hard points on all these ships, so that as you build something in the ship designer, the game will auto assign. It'll run through these randomized, of course, and start firing laser cannons or plasma cannons from various ports on the ship, depending on how the ship designer has designed them and how we've mapped them out on the ship. Because of course, we need to tell the game that this firing point is a front firing point. It's obviously not an aft firing point like we have back here. And then the game, as you choose to fire, will then choose, excuse me, the optimal point to make the shot with on the target, and then fire from that firing point. And that'll, again, it just adds more flavor to the game. And the great thing about this is there will be no added complexity for the player. So some 4X games we've seen, you can lay out on the ship, if the ship were, on a vertical view, you could add your individual armor units and all that stuff. And for us, for our purposes and our gameplay choices, we don't believe that is an appropriate level of management. For essentially, when you play a 4X game, right, typically you're like, you're an emperor or the leader of your faction, right? And a leader of the faction is probably not going to worry about if you've got a little armor piece here versus over here and all that kind of stuff. So we've really designed the system so that it will still, the ship designer will still play in a very broad strokes kind of way. You're still just you're just going to tell the designer what kind of ship you want, what kind of systems you want on that ship, what kind of weapons you want, how you want them customized. Are they forward firing, rear firing, all those sorts of things, right? But then we'll have the game figure out the rest in terms of the aesthetics as to where to fire those objects for you. And so we think that that's a really good compromise and is an appropriate level of management for the player, right? So you're not micromanaging ship design. You're still making designs, and you're still able to design ships that can have very different purposes in how they play out, but you're not going to focus on very small details, the minutia of truly building an actual starship, right? And so these are the sorts of things that we're looking at in terms of hard points, the ship designer work that we're looking at right now. And as I talked about earlier, also making sure that weapons are able to fire, but not just do damage only to the intended target. But essentially, if I fire missiles, and let's just say the missiles are being fired on this destroyer because this battleship is like, yep, this destroyer is really weak and I can knock it out. Have your Titan run in there and bam, take the hits, because it can take the hits. So, and of course, allowing your frigate to escape and to get away. So these kinds of little added bits of realism really kind of reshape the tactics that you can use in terms of design, fleet composition in the game. Something else that we're looking at as well, and we haven't fully fixed it up yet because again we're dealing with placement on the map still and revising our map, is the planet, as you can see, is kind of it's not fully on the map. Ultimately, we are going to extend the map past the planet, and we're going to make it so that you can hide your fleet behind a planet, which we think will really add a lot more versatility to planets, because planets typically are just like big ships that sit there, right? They're almost like a background star. They just happen to have weapons, right? But we want to add some more depth to the game, and planets are a great thing. How many TV shows or movies have you watched where they're like hid behind this planet, and we were able to spoof the enemy and get a jump on them, and so that's something where, again, if you have a fleet of ships that maybe your design style is to have ships that work well up close. Maybe you have a bunch of frigates and destroyers and cruisers, right? And the enemy brings in a bunch of heavy titans, right? So you know that you can't close the gap in here, right? If you're just to keep your ships here, and this guy will just move the titan back here, and he's going to fire out here, right? Like, you've really got nothing, right? He'll just destroy you as you try to close in the range. But what if you hid behind the planet, right? Because the point of the game is that the enemy is going to have to destroy your fleet to get to your planet. So what if you hid your fleet behind the planet, right? Well, that's going to force me, the AI or the player, to come after you now, and now I'm going to have to move around the planet. Well, when we move around to the planet side, now you've got me at close range, and maybe in a really bad position, and maybe in a position where now you can try to encircle my ships and knock me out, right? So now a planet just moved from kind of this background object with weapons to actually something that, again, you're able to utilize the map space, right? The map just isn't just this grid that just sits there, right? Like now there's more that you can do with it. And so as we're moving forward with tactical, we're really thinking about these things, and we've had some ideas in our design document that we've had, but it's kind of one of those processes that's been very organic, that as we're putting stuff in the game, we're like, whoa, hey, we can do this actually, and wouldn't that be great? And so we're trying to be aware, of course, of feature creep. Always a killer in games is that essentially you keep revising the game to the point that it's never released because it's always this work in progress. And there are certain things that we would like to add that we're not going to. We know it's going to take too much effort in terms of time, and we really want to get this game out there in your hands. These are things for expansion packs and DLCs. But these are things, like I said, the map change and stuff like that. Those are easy enough changes to make that we think are well worth it. But just kind of some of the ideas, it kind of just gives you a sense of some of the thought process as we're making the game. So one of the things you'll also notice too is that we have these big indicators when you select ships. So we've got it set up so that you've got your 4 quadrants of the ship. No, there are not 6. There's not a top and a bottom because we don't have a 3. This Lord of Rigel is not a 3-dimensional game in its map. It's still a 2D map. And so what we have are indicators for your shields and your armor. So obviously 100%, 50%, and then it'll dim to 0, and obviously the 100% will dim into the 50%. And then these armor pieces will just dim down into nothing once the armor has failed. And so these are just quick indicators for you as you're moving around that you can kind of see, kind of what's going on with your fleet. And we think it'll be really useful for players just to kind of get a quick glimpse as to what's going on in a very nice, easy, visual way, right? Because it's necessary to make sure that data is really accessible in real time, because you at some levels don't have infinite time, or you'd have to pause real time too much to get that information, which really then is it really real time at that point, right? So we're trying to think of ways that we can make it so that data is quickly accessible and you can make fast decisions. But there are folks out there still saying turn-based, turn-based, turn-based. So, and we like turn-based. Obviously, our first attempt at tactical was turn-based, and we get that. And after talking with our publisher about it, we had some really great conversations and very constructive feedback about real time and where it could go. And it really made us kind of see that, like, if we really think about this, there are ways to do this in a way that can provide the positives of turn-based and also integrate the positives of real-time, right? Because really the big difference between turn-based and real-time from our perspective is that, of course, it's the thought process, right? It's the thought process, and it's the cleanliness of the battle, right? Because really in turn-based, you have the time to think, you have the time to scan ships, look at them, get their data, make those tough decisions about, should I target subsystems? Should I, what ship should I focus on? Those sorts of things, right? And in real time, in a lot of cases, that's, at least conventionally in the past, that really hasn't been done. Combat is either too fast or it's very arcadey, right? So really these ships are just like one big bar of health, and you kind of hit this ship enough times, right? And it's going to die. It's going to blow up. So then it's, really, yes, there's real-time combat, which, is quote-unquote better, but you've lost a lot of depth, and so we don't want to lose that depth. So we have a couple things. So of course, the simplest solution is let's have a pause button. So we have this pause, and as you can see, nothing works. Of course, they can play or it can double time. So those are options. But this next option, we're really happy with this idea. It's not fully implemented yet, but conceptually, we think it really is going to address what we need to do to make this. It really makes real time an enhancement now, right? In the sense that it plays proper, it makes real time even better, and it also addresses numerous issues that are present in a real time game, right? Which is just the inability to think and to make decisions in as fast of a time frame as necessary in real time combat. So we call this commander mode. We've talked about this before in the past in some videos and some social media posts that we've made, but this is, once we get this implemented, it's going to be a really great feature, and we're quite confident that you'll like it as well. And so commander mode is very similar to something like you would see in the Fallout series, like the VATS system, right? So the game essentially is going to pause, and let's just say, for instance, we're in the middle of this big fight here, and we've got some Tulok ships zipping around and human ships trying to circle around, and you're just like, let's just pause for a second. Let me get some status on some ships, and then I'm going to make a series of command orders here, and then we're going to move. That's essentially what this is going to let you do. So you're going to go into commander mode. You're going to start. We can look like in pause. You can scan ships, all that stuff, and the game again will be paused. You can then start to issue a series of orders based upon the data that you have, and then when you're done, you're just going to hit the play button. And the game will have logged all of the commands that you have given all of the ships in your fleet, and it will simply execute them. If that didn't work, if something went wrong, again, go back to commander mode, and you can reissue orders, or maybe you like the orders that you gave, but let's say this cruiser, it's just not working for it. Well, click on it, move it, it's going to cancel all the orders that you had queued in commander mode, right? So those are the sorts of things that, again, we think it will play out really nicely. And in a sense, it's a huge enhancement over turn-based, because turn-based, you kind of had two choices. Either you did the moves yourselves, or you hit the auto button, like we have here, and you sit back and you let the AI do the work, right? And then you can try to intervene here and there. But with commander mode, really, you can sit back and watch, and if you want to, and then you can, but you're also the one giving the orders, which is really nice. So we think that this is going to really, it's going to address the concerns of people that are concerned about tactical versus real-time combat. But B, we also just think that even if you're a hardcore real-time strategy person, you're going to just appreciate how intuitive this system is, and really how you're able to kind of enjoy the battle for its visual qualities a little more too, because you've already issued the commands, and you can kind of kick back and relax and just kind of watch and then intervene where necessary, right? And again, this system is not going to be something where if I have 36 ships on the human side and 36 ships on the AI side, I'm going to order the whole battle in one use of the commander mode, and then it's just going to act the whole thing out, right? You're going to need to intervene here and there, most likely, and make adjustments, but you have that opportunity with this commander mode. And so those are some of the kind of the bigger changes that we've added to tactical that we're quite excited about. And as we get them implemented, of course, we're going to have videos. We're going to show you what that looks like. And we think that you guys are going to love it. I really am very confident. We're very excited about tactical. It's turning out better than we had hoped. And some of that's just, some of it's just we didn't anticipate. Some ideas worked out better than we thought they would, and some of it is as we're going through and we're working on tactical, just like, yeah, we can add this really easily, and it just adds that much more depth and more flavor to it, right? And so things that we just didn't see initially, now we're seeing them as we're going through this process. And so um, we're really pleased with how this is coming along. Um, and again, we're adding a lot of depth. Just kind of recap, with ships, they're all going to be scaled to be real between a frigate and a battleship. So these are all going to be to scale. This battleship and this destroyer, which will move over here, these are all to scale, right? So this is going to just give you just a great sense of uh, realism in the game. And on top of that, too, every class of ship is going to have tuned movement settings, tuned hard points, which will be per model. So on these ships, they're not just going to fire at random points. They're going to fire from, whoa, we went to the object there, which of course we're going to add colliders. You won't be able to do that in the final version. But you're going to be firing from these ports, right? And it won't just be everything, right? So we have missile ports on this ship. So it's going to fire from, if it's a missile, it'll fire from missile ports. If it's a weapon, beam weapon, it'll fire from a beam weapon port. If it's the Tulok, for instance, this is where their heavy mounted weapons and spinal mounted weapons will fire from. So you'll see those weapons firing from these points. And so those are the sorts of things that we think are really just going to just add such a huge layer of immersion to the game. And it's going to just allow the player to play the game in that many more different ways, right? So you can go back and be like, well, I fought this way with, frigates kind of being used as little scalpels that I could use to disable larger ships while my big titans came in there and took fire, kind of took the heat. And, maybe you want to play another game where you want to use your titans as kind of a turtle and it's just a long distance artillery piece where you're worried about your big ships being taken out by smaller ones. So maybe you're going to build your fleet composition where your titans are just missile launchers and fighters, right? And all they're doing is just and it's a huge point defense system to protect itself from smaller attacks, right? And you're going to place these ships in the back of the map, and they're going to launch their long-range weapons. And you're really going to focus on having cruisers, destroyers, and battleships do the main engagements, right? So there's all sorts of different ways that you can play this out, and so that's what we're really excited about. And it should just allow for huge diversity of gameplay. So the only other thing, there's a couple things left to show, which of course is just the basic UI systems. So we're going to have these controllers. So right now it lets you control both the AI and the player. That's obviously not going to be that way in the full game. That will be adjusted. But you'll be able to set up command groups. So if you want to have like these ships being a command group, you would hit like Control 1. That would make a command group that you can just select these ships in the future. So that's more, quality of life kind of stuff. We're going to have formations for ships. Again, where this isn't implemented yet, but it will be. So you can fly ships in different formations. And again, especially with the real physics in the game and stuff like that, it will just add more depth, right? These formations won't just be visual things like, oh yeah, it's really cool. My ships flew in, let's just say, this square formation. Great. We'll have things where big capital ships will be in the middle, right? And so you're going to use your smaller ships to protect those things. And so different formations will do different things, and they're going to have some value to you. And again, we're not going to have features unless we feel that they're useful for you, something that actually makes a difference in the combat. We think that the way we have the formations, or the way that we'll be implementing those, is really going to help with that. There's also obviously the retreat, the destruct. Those are pretty self-explanatory, like in most games. Auto, that'll just be letting the AI take over for you. And reinforce, which again, I'm sure you've heard me a few times now, 36 ships, 36 ships, 36 ships. So there'll be 36 ships per side on the map at one time. That does not mean that you can't have a fleet of 100 ships and use them in the same round of combat. What that does mean, though, is that you can only have 36 of the 100 on the map at the same time. So this reinforce button, what it will let you do is when you click it, you'll be able to place more ships. Let's say you have 36 ships initially, you lost 10. You're going to hit reinforce, you're going to pull up a window. It's going to show you the ships left in the fleet. It'll start pulling in those ships, and then you can start to engage them in combat. So technically, you can have fleets of an infinite size, and there is benefit to it. it's just not going to be all at once. And the reason, again, that we've chosen 36, and it could be more and it could be less, it really just depends how the gameplay works out when we get to that point. But we're doing that so that it's not overwhelming when you play the game. Because if you were controlling 100 ships, we know that either you would be using the pause button all the time, or the commander all the time, or just it really wouldn't be real time anymore, right? Because you're just constantly blocking up that time. So with 36, for the moment, we think that that is a conceivably reasonable number of ships to engage in combat, so that you have a fair level of control to issue orders in a intelligent way, and not be overwhelmed. And still enough ships to where this isn't a one-on-one fight and you're going to have 100 rounds for a 100 ship fleet, right? So if you had a 100 ship fleet, technically you would have you could have three, you'd have to have 3 waves of reinforcements, or 2 waves of reinforcements on top of your initial wave to end that battle if you so chose. And you may not choose to. You may just say, you know what, we just need to retreat and call it good. You know, I had a big fleet, this isn't working, retreat them, right? So we think that again, this is just about managing real time and really giving a lot of thought about how we can manage these systems. Other than that, there's not much else to show you right now. Like I said, it's a lot of fit and finish that we're working on right now with the placement, and those sorts of things. I do want to show off a couple cool effects that we should have working in the next few weeks. I don't want to give too much of a timetable because, of course, we always miss them. But I think we've got really good feedback from our Wise Galaxy map, and I'm going to assume we're going to get great feedback on this too. I think this addresses a lot of player concerns. It visually is good, looks very good for a 4X game, and really just a game in general. And as well, has a lot of great features upcoming, and will play a lot different than most other 4X games out there, and that we really think will really help change and adjust how the Galaxy larger strategic layer of the game plays. So next couple days we'll have the ship stats loaded in from Ship Designer in the game. Those will be working, and then we get to the fun part, which is blowing stuff up, and we're really looking forward to showing that part off, because I'm sure, like the rest of you, our team at least loves to blow stuff up. That's one of the cool things about sci-fi, is blowing ships up. So we'll have lots of great screenshots coming. So I just want to show off a couple little things here that we have going on. So we're working on right now just a missile system. So this is actually one of the missiles in game, using a thruster system and a just kind of an exhaust trail. So you'll be seeing stuff like this in the game. Missiles will all be scaled to real. They will fall within real scale. So missile will be the size of a missile compared to, let's say, a frigate or a battleship. They can be very small objects on a map. And the same with the strike craft. Again, all built to scale, will be displayed to scale. Relative, again, all the way up to a battleship. After that, it just gets a lot hazier due to just constraints of making a game, right, that's usable and playable. The other thing that we're going to show off really quick is we're working on a cloaking device. So this is our cloak effect for one of our Xantus ships that we're toying with right now. One of the things that it's difficult to see with the resolution of this is that there's actually a great kind of distortion ripple effect when the ship is actually cloaked. So when the ship stays cloaked like this and it's moving around, you'll kind of get this distortion. Really good reference might be to look at like Star Trek, when you look at the Klingon bird of prey as they cloak and they move to the stars, and there's this great little distortion effect. That's what these ships will look like when they are cloaked. And we're working on some ways that, even from the player's perspective, when a ship is cloaked, how does the player know that, like, how does the player see their ships when they're cloaked, right? Because we don't want cloaked ships just to be cloaked for the player, because then the player really can't see them much either. So we have some different ideas about how we want to implement that. One of the ways might be just using a hologram system, so the players can just see that the ship's in hologram, which means that it's cloaked some way, or having a special color for when a ship is cloaked, but again, using some sort of like a transparent, semi-transparent ship hull for the ship. So those are the sorts of things that we're working on with tactical. And we are hoping the next few weeks here, again, another video, more fun stuff to show off, more stuff blowing up, which is going to be great. And really just looking forward to everyone's feedback on this. So we really appreciate your time, looking forward to your feedback, and we'll see you soon.